Shall we? Ah. The chief business of my life has always been to indulge my senses. I have never known anything of greater importance. I felt born for the fair sex, and have ever loved it dearly, and been loved by it as often and as much as possible. Likewise, I've always had a weakness for good living, and I have felt excited and passionate about every object that has excited my curiosity.
Now that I am but the shadow of the once brilliant Casanova, I love to chatter. Now that age has whitened my hair and deadened the ardor of my senses, my imagination does not take such a high flight, and I think differently. What embitters my old age is that, having a heart as warm as ever, I have no longer the strength necessary to secure a single day as blissful as those which I owe to this charming girl.
I love women. I don't think I have the slightest inclination to get married.
When I recall these events, I grow young again and feel once more the delights of youth, despite the long years which separate me from those happy times. But now that I'm getting into my dotage, I look on the dark side of everything. I am invited to a wedding and I see nothing but gloom. I'm witnessing the coronation of Leopold II at Prague. I say to myself, nullo coronari, cursed old age. Thou art only worthy of dwelling in hell.
Casanova. We remember him as a great lover of women, but he was so much more than that. A magician, an astrologer, a low-life scoundrel, a terrible snob, a spy for governments, a secret Freemason, a Kabbalist, a servant, a prolific writer. He was rich and poor, a millionaire that lost everything and made it back again many times over.
This is the story of Casanova, as he called it himself, the history of my life. In April 1725, Giacomo Casanova is born in the city of Venice. June 1798, Casanova dies at the Duke's Palace in Duchov. He is buried in the chapel of Santa Barbara. Many years later, his body is dug up and moved, never to be found.
The longer I live, the more interest I take in my papers. They are the treasures which attaches me to life and makes death more hateful still. And so in the end, through my memoirs, these letters are my life. But I know full well that the end, even of my cherished memories, is not far distant.
Few people have lived a life like that of Giacomo Casanova.
Yet at his funeral on the 7th of June 1798, only one distant relative attended the burial at the Santa Barbara Chapel. He was buried overlooking the lake, far away from his homeland in Italy. His extraordinary life and memory would have been lost to history if it wasn't for historians, writers and professors that managed to salvage the papers and letters of ladies that Casanova once loved. In 1899, an English poet named Arthur Symons came to Duchov to find out what happened to the papers that Casanova had left behind in Dux.
During all this time, people have been discussing the authenticity and the truthfulness of the memoirs. They have been searching for information about Casanova in various directions, and yet hardly anyone has ever taken the trouble or obtained the permission to make a careful examination in precisely the one place where information was most likely to be found. The greater part of the manuscripts were in Casanova's handwriting, which I could see gradually beginning to get shaky with years. Then there were many big bundles of letters addressed to him, dating over more than 30 years. Almost all the rest was in his own handwriting.
In July 1792, Casanova wrote that he'd arrived at the 12th volume. In the memoirs themselves we read,
The various adventures which, at the age of 72 years, impel me to write these memoirs.
Written probably during a revision in 1797 at the beginning of one of the 2 chapters of the last volume, which were missing until discovered by Arthur Symons, was at Dux in 1899.
The library, which was formed or at least arranged by Casanova, and which remains as he left it, contains some 25,000 volumes, some of them of considerable value.
Then Symons found a box with hundreds of letters. He had no time to make copies himself, but he realized that he'd hit a treasure trove and writes about it full of enthusiasm.
They come from Venice, Paris, Rome, Prague, Beirut, The Hague, Genoa, Fiume, Trieste, etc., and are addressed to as many places, often poste restante. Many are letters from women, some in beautiful handwriting on thick paper, others on scraps of paper in painful hands, ill-spelt. A countess writes pitifully imploring help. One protests her love in spite of the many chagrins he has caused her. Another asks how they are to live together. Another laments that a report has gone about that she is secretly living with him, which may harm his reputation. Some are in French, more in Italian. Mon cher Giacometto, writes one woman in French. Carissimo a amatissimo, writes another in Italian. There are a great many letters dating from 1779 to 1786, signed Francesca Buscini. They are written in Italian, and one of them begins, Unico mio vero amico, my only true friend. In another letter, ill-spelt, be assured that evil tongues, vapors, calumny, nothing can change my heart, which is yours entirely, and has no will to change its master. Now it seems to me that these letters must be from Manon Belletti, and that they are the letters referred to in the 6th volume of the memoirs. We read how on Christmas Day 1759, Casanova receives a letter from Manon in Paris, announcing her marriage with Monsieur Blondel, architect of the king and member of his academy. She returns him his letters and begs him to return hers or burn them. But however this may be, I was fortunate enough to find the set of letters which I was most anxious to find. The letters from Henriette, whose loss every writer on Casanova has lamented.
Henriette.
Henriette, it will be remembered, makes her first appearance at Cesena in the year 1748. After their meeting at Geneva, she reappears romantically apropos 22 years later at Aix in Provence, and she writes to Casanova proposing un commerce épistolaire, asking him what he has done since his escape from prison, and promising to do her best to tell him all that has happened to her during the long interval. After quoting her letter, he adds, I replied to her, accepting the correspondence that she offered me, and telling her briefly all my vicissitudes. She related to me in turn, in some 40 letters, all the history of her life. If she dies before me, I shall add these letters to these memoirs. But today she is still alive, and always happy, though now old. And I am inclined to think that she survived Casanova, for one of the letters is dated Beirut 1798, the year of Casanova's death. Does it not suggest a view of Casanova, not quite the view of all the world? To me it shows the real man, who perhaps of all others best understood what Shelley meant when he said,
True love in this differs from gold or clay, that to divide is not to take away.
Having spent his last years writing his memoirs, The History of My Life, they are finally published in 1823 in an expurgated version by the publishers Brockhaus. Many of his letters and papers left lying in the palace. In 1973, Dutch Casanovist Marco Lieflang found by chance in one of Waldstein's libraries a book bound in an undiscovered letter written by Casanova. The letter revealed the name of one of Casanova's most famous lovers. Previously only known as MM, as Casanova tried to protect her identity, her name was Matilda. Because of the difficulty to see the originals of the Casanova archive, Marco Lieflang, the Dutch enthusiast of Casanova, has tried to form a shadow archive of copies and transcriptions, which can be handled by anybody who calls on the museum at Dux. The showpiece of the shadow archive is a photocopy of the manuscript of the memoirs lent by the owner, the publisher Brockhaus, who carefully keeps the original locked away at Wiesbaden. It arrived in 1998 at the bicentennial commemoration of Casanova's death. After 200 years, the manuscript and Casanova's letters have come home again.
Casanova was born in Venice, Italy on the 2nd of April 1725. His father Gaetano was an actor in the Venetian theatre, and his mother, Zanetta Farusi, fell in love and married him secretly, only informing her widowed mother, Marzia, afterwards. A year after Giacomo was born, the Casanovas left for London. His parents joined a touring theatre group, and grandmother Marzia, having pardoned her daughter, looked after baby Giacomo.
His mother wasn't there. She was an actress. She worked in London, she worked in Dresden. Well, anyway, she was away, and Casanova was educated at home by his grandmother.
In London, Giovanni, Casanova's brother, was born. He later became a famous painter. 3 more children were born in Venice. Father Gaetano died when Giacomo was 8 years old. Grandma took care of the children when Zanetta played her roles on faraway stages. In the meanwhile, she paved the road for Giacomo's education. He became a student at the Padua University, studying moral philosophy, chemistry, mathematics and law. However, the library at Padua University had many other books, which are works on magic, the occult and the Kabbalah. Casanova read them all, filling his mind with more immoral ideas of fantasy. Books about erotica also exerted a major influence on him.
And they tried to give him a decent job. And if you were poor, there was only really one way to do it. No, two ways. You could try to get into the army or get into the church. And for Casanova, it was going to be the church.
In 1739, Casanova returned to Venice to become an abbate, received into the church in the early stages of becoming a priest. However, he met 76-year-old Venetian senator Elvis Gaspero Malipiero, one of the most powerful men in the city. He lived in a beautiful palace on the Venetian canal and had over 20 mistresses. It was into the world of good wine and beautiful women that Casanova entered.
The aging senator introduced the handsome man to women for whom he could no longer pleasure. A poor boy needed a wealthy patron, and there were over 12,000 servants in the city, 20,000 beggars, and over 40,000 women who provided services to the wealthy merchants. Casanova made sure he always looked his best.
And there is a wonderful story that someday in Venice he was going to preach in a church on San Samuele, very near where he was born, and next to the palace of Senator Malipiero. And Casanova was already a nice-looking, nice-speaking guy who attracted the attention of a lot of girls. And he had the chance to give a sermon one day in the church of San Samuele, and it went fine. So fine that the next Sunday there were more people. There was a crowd because they wanted to see this new miracle of a priest. And Casanova did his best to produce something nice, but he was invited to lunch before the sermon. And this was a nice lunch, and he had wine and another glass of wine and another glass of wine. So that when the time came that he had to deliver his sermon, he got up in the pulpit of San Samuele, and then suddenly his eyesight blurred. What am I going to talk about? He couldn't remember a thing. I thought, the only thing I can do now to get a way out is to pretend I'm fainting.
Casanova's newfound position as a member of the clergy gave him access to the Italian aristocracy and an invitation from the Countess Monterel to her estate north of Venice.
This was Casanova's first encounter with the beautiful daughter of the gatekeeper, Lucia. She visited him in his room and he persuaded her to lie in his bed. But what could become of her at the hands of a future priest?
He later claimed that he was not in love with her, but Lucia would not make love to him. It was friends of hers, two sisters, Nanette and Maton, who visited Casanova's bed.
What sweet recollections that the villa has left in my memory. It seemed that I saw my divine love for the first time. Our looks were full of ardent love. Our hearts beat in concert with the most tender impatience. The hand of love seemed to have prepared on purpose for mysteries of a secret worship. We did not exchange one word. Our hearts spoke the same language. 2 whole hours were devoted to the most delightful, loving ecstasies. At last, we exclaimed together in mutual ecstasy. O love, we thank thee.
Casanova had made his first conquest with 2 women. He had begun his long career as a great lover.
Casanova's attention now turned to one of the most famous courtesans in Venice, Giulietta, known as the Cleaner because her father was a street sweeper. She was 17 years old and very beautiful. The Marchese Sanfratelli, a statesman in Venice, paid her £10,000 for her pleasures. Then there was his new mistress, Teresa. One evening he came home to find Casanova in bed with Teresa. He took out his cane and whipped Casanova and threw him out of the house. Casanova had learnt his lesson, but he had a new acquired taste for good food, high society, and beautiful women. However, it was his superior, including his mother, that decided he should enter a seminary for priests, the Seminary San Capriano.
He went to a seminary and had his formal education to become a priest. He never really became one. Not that far, but the first steps were taken, and he was an abbé.
It was at this time that he was offered his first paying job as secretary to Bishop Bernardo de Bernardis. Casanova set off to Rome to take up his new appointment.
But stopping at Padua, he had his first exposure to gambling and prostitutes. He met a monk who invited him to a brothel. There he had the pleasure of a young woman. Later he attended a gambling table and lost £300. Thus began Casanova's main interests, gambling and loose women. In his lifetime, he won and lost several £1 million.
He loved gambling. He was, until late in his life, I think he was really addicted to gambling and to helping the game also a bit. I think he, at times, learned to cheat while playing cards.
Casanova came across a Greek slave girl whom he made love to. Her owner, a Turk, offered her for sale to him for £1,000, but he had no money to pay the fee. Saddened, he continued on to Rome.
When Casanova arrived in Rome, he was given an apartment in the Cardinal Acquaviva's palace. He twice had an audience with Pope Benedict XIV. With the Pope's approval, it gave him access to the highest of Roman society. He met with the Castelli family and their daughter Lucrezia, whom along with her sister he spied through the keyhole.
I watched through the keyhole and saw the two sisters come into their room. Then my two beauties, their door once locked, completed their night toilet, which in that fortunate climate is similar to the costume of our first mother. Lucretia, knowing that I was waiting to come in, told her sister to lie down on the side towards the window, and the Virgin, having no idea that she was exposing her most secret beauties to my profane eyes, crossed the room in a state of complete nakedness. Happy moments which I can no longer enjoy, but the sweet remembrance of which death alone can make me lose. I believe I never undressed myself as quickly as I did that evening. I open the door and fall into the arms of my Lucretia, who says to her sister,
"It is my angel, my love. Never mind him and go to sleep."
What a delightful picture I could offer to my readers if it were possible for me to paint voluptuousness in its most enchanting colors. What ecstasies of love from the very onset. What delicious raptures succeed each other until the sweetest fatigue made us give way to the soothing influence of Morpheus. The first rays of the sun, piercing through the crevices of the shutters, wake us out of our refreshing slumbers, and like two valorous knights who have ceased fighting only to renew the contest with increased valor, we lose no time in giving ourselves up to all the intensity of the flame which consumes us.
Did you remark with what candour I secured for us 2 hours of delightful tete-a-tete, and a tete-a-tete and a vis-a-vis too? How clever love is.
Yes. Darling, love has made but one of our two souls. I adore you. And if I have the courage to pass so many days without seeing you, it is only to be rewarded by the freedom of one single day like this.
I did not think it possible, but you have managed it all very well. You know too much for your age, dearest.
A month ago, I was but an ignorant child. And you are the first woman who has initiated me into the mysteries of love. Your departure would kill me, for I could not find another woman like you in all Italy.
What? Am I your first love? Alas, you will never be cured of it. Oh, why am I not entirely your own? You are also the first true love of my heart, and you will be the last. Great will be the happiness of my successor. I should not be jealous of her, but what suffering would be mine if I thought that her heart was not like mine.
Lucretia, seeing my eyes wet with tears, began to give way to our own, and seating ourselves on the grass, our lips drank our tears amidst the sweetest kisses. How sweet is the nectar of the tears shed by love, when that nectar is relished amidst the raptures of mutual ardor. I have often tasted them, those delicious tears, and I can say knowingly that the ancient physicians were right, and that the modern are wrong.
Casanova was not uncompassionate in his dealings with women. He allowed a pregnant lady who had collapsed at the front door of his palace to sleep in his bed, but the rumour soon spread that Casanova had, in fact, made her pregnant. The cardinal, afraid of his reputation, removed him from the house and requested him to travel to Constantinople. Casanova presented his letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and was invited to the house of Yusuf Ali.
Do you know, I don't think I have the slightest inclination to get married.
What? Oh, well then I must believe that you are not a perfect man, or that you intend to work out your own damnation. Unless you choose to tell me that your Christianity is outward.
I am a man in the very strongest sense of the word. And I am a true Christian. And I must also confess that I love women. I have not the slightest idea of depriving myself of the most delightful of all pleasures.
According to your faith, damnation awaits you.
I feel certain of the contrary, for when we confess our sins, our priests are obliged to give us absolution.
It was a turning point in Casanova's life. He would never involve himself in the priesthood again. This time, he entered the army.
Casanova was more or less a soldier for a certain period, and not so much that he was in the army, that he was in command or was under command of somebody, but he liked to have a fancy uniform, so he had one made. Of no army at all, he was general of his own army, one-man army.
Casanova, through his Vatican contacts, was appointed to Giacomo da Riva, governor of the Venetian galleys.
In Corfu, he landed from sea at a place where, on a very nice beach, where there was one chapel. A chapel where girls who wanted to become mother went to pray and to ask for a good fruit. And there Casanova collected some sort of an army of about 6 or 7 shepherds around him. He paid them something to keep curious people out of the way. And that's the closest that Casanova has come to really being in the army.
Whilst in Corfu, Casanova contracted syphilis. It took him many weeks to recover, having obtained the dreaded mercury treatments, the only known effective cure. Casanova returned to Venice during the month of the Carnival.
There he sat in Venice's most famous cafes in the Piazza San Marco. Casanova met and engaged a troupe of actors and began gambling and womanizing. By the end of the month, he had lost everything at the gambling tables and was penniless. Broke and disillusioned, he joined an orchestra playing violin at the San Samuel Theatre. His social position had collapsed, and he eked out an existence on a low wage. But fate followed Casanova once again. He was hired to play violin with the orchestra at a ball of an aristocrat who had married earlier that day. Just before dawn, Casanova was leaving the palace when he saw a red-robed senator climbing into a gondola. He had collapsed and was holding his shoulder. He was having a stroke. Casanova ran to the nearest coffee house to find a surgeon. In the gondola, the surgeon bled the senator and they took him to his palace in Santa Marina.
Taking everything upon myself, I ordered a servant to hurry out for a physician who came in a short time and ordered the patient to be bled again, thus approving the first bleeding prescribed by me. An hour later, 2 noblemen, friends of the senator, came in. They were in despair. They had inquired about the accident from the gondoliers, and having been told that I knew more than they did, they loaded me with questions which I answered.
Did you? You don't know? Well, why are you here? Did you? It's worse than we were told. What happened? How did he get in such a position? Why is he there now? Why is he in such a bad way?
I don't know!
They did not know who I was and did not like to ask me, whilst I thought it better to preserve a modest silence. The patient did not move. His breathing alone showed that he was still alive. All visitors were sent away by my advice, and the 2 noblemen and myself were the only persons in the sick man's room.
So if you have any other business, I suggest you go. We both shall attend the patient now on a mattress by his bed.
Sir, I will remain near his bed. If I went away, this patient will die, and he will live as long as I'm near him.
This sententious answer struck them with astonishment, as I expected it would, and they looked at each other in great surprise.
He always had an interest in medicine. He managed to stay in the house of Bragadin and to perform some miracles with Kabbalah, some secret science. And Bragadin recovered and got the idea that it was Casanova and his hocus pocus that made him recover. So Casanova, without saying so, has been promoted the savior of Bragadin.
Whoever you may be, I am indebted to you for my life. Your first protectors wanted to make you a priest, a doctor, an advocate, a soldier, and ended making a fiddler of you. Those persons did not know you. God had evidently instructed your guardian angel to bring you to me. I know you and appreciate you. If you will be my son, you have only to acknowledge me for a father and for the future, until my death. I will treat you as my own child. Your apartment is ready. You may send your clothes. You shall have a servant, a gondola at your orders, my own table, and 10 sequins a month. It is the sum I used to receive from my father when I was your age. You need not think of the future. Think only of enjoying yourself. Take me as your advisor in everything that may happen to you, in everything you may wish to undertake, and you may be certain of always finding me your friend. My son. My dear son.
Such is the history of my metamorphosis, and of the lucky stroke which, taking me from the vile profession of a fiddler, raised me to the rank of a grandee.
Casanova moved into the senator's mansion. He was given his own apartment, his own gondola, and a monthly allowance.
It was not only Bragadin, there were two other friends, three old men sitting together there in this. Mr. Barbaro, Mr. Dandolo, and Bragadin.
My son. My son.
Casanova stayed there for quite a long time. And Bragadin wasn't real wealthy. He had a nice palace, he had a nice job as a senator, but no money. But whatever money he had, he shared it with Casanova, and he gave him a sort of weekly allowance on which Casanova could more or less live. And the rest of it, he tried to find by gambling.
Returning to the gambling tables, Casanova lost a large sum of money. But one night, luck was on his side. While he was romancing a young lady in one of the gambling dens, she dropped a diamond earring. And when she left the next morning, Casanova took it to a pawnbroker and made a tidy sum. As Casanova crossed St. Mark's Square, he spotted a beautiful girl and an elderly priest. He went over to offer his assistance. They informed him that they were taking a gondola to Mestre, and the girl, Christine, was in fact the priest's niece and was in search of her husband. Casanova offered to guide them.
We proceeded towards the church, and I offered my arm to the niece, who, not knowing whether she ought to accept it or not, said to me,
"Do you suppose I cannot walk alone?"
I have no such idea, but if I do not offer you my arm, people will think me wanting in politeness.
Then I will take it. But now that I have your arm, what will people think?
Perhaps that we love each other and make a very nice couple.
And if anyone should inform your mistress that we're in love with each other, or even that you've given your arm to a young girl?
I have no mistress, and I shall have none in future, for I could not find a girl as pretty as you in all Venice.
Well, I'm very sorry for you, for we cannot afford to go again to Venice. And even if we could, how could we remain there 6 months?
As the day progressed, an extraordinary flirtation developed, and Casanova half considered proposing to her.
You said 6 months were necessary to know a girl well.
I would willingly defray all your expenses.
Indeed. Then say so to my uncle, and he'll think it over. For I cannot stay here alone.
Of course. In 6 months, you'll know me well.
Oh, I know you very well already.
Could you accept a man like me?
Why not?
And will you love me?
Yes, very much indeed when you are my husband.
I looked at the young girl with astonishment. She seemed to me a princess in the disguise of a peasant girl.
Casanova suggested that they take 2 rooms. The priest suggested that 2 beds and 1 room would suffice. Casanova did not know what to think, whether the priest was mad, perverted, or just playing a strange game with him.
My uncle's gone. I didn't hear him.
Dearest Christine, you are more lovely than one of God's angels. I have a great longing to give you a kiss.
If you long to give me a kiss, dear friend, come and give me one.
I jumped out of my bed. Decency made her hide her face. It was cold and I was in love. I find myself in her arms by one of those spontaneous movements which sentiment alone can cause. We belong to each other without ever having thought of it. She happy and rather confused, I delighted yet unable to realize the truth of a victory won without any contest. An hour passed in the midst of happiness, during which we forgot the whole world. Calm followed the stormy gusts of passionate love. Christine was the first to break the silence.
What have we just done?
We've become husband and wife.
What will my uncle say in the morning?
He need not know anything about this until he has given us the nuptial benediction in his own church.
And when will he do so?
And we've made all the arrangements necessary for a public marriage.
Well, how long will that be?
About a month.
We can't be married during Lent.
I will obtain permission.
You do not deceive me.
No, for I adore you.
Then you no longer want to know me better.
No, for I know you thoroughly now. And I feel certain that you'll make me happy.
And will you make me happy too?
I hope so.
He has certainly here, he has many facets. It's like a diamond with many facets. And you turn it and another facet is going to blink. But not everybody would get entrance to his heart, I suppose.
The very next day, I resolved on ensuring Christine's happiness without making her my wife. I had thought of marrying her when I loved her better than myself, but after obtaining possession, the balance was so much on my side that my self-love proved stronger than my love for Christine. I could not make up my mind to renounce the advantages, the hopes which I thought were attached to my happy independence. Yet I was the slave of sentiment. I was aware that she was perhaps bearing in her womb a living token of our mutual love, and I shivered at the bare possibility that her confidence in me might be repaid by shame and everlasting misery. I bethought myself of finding her a husband, in every other way better than myself. A husband so good that she would not only forgive me for the insult I should thus be guilty of towards her, but also thank me at the end, and like me all the better for my deceit.
Shut up in a room with the three worshippers of my oracle, Bragadin, Dandolo, and Barbaro, I consulted Paralis upon the affair which I had so much at heart. The answer was Serenus must attend to it.
Serenus?
Serenus was the Kabbalistic name of the old Senator Bragadin, and the excellent man immediately expressed himself ready to execute all the orders of Paralis. It was my duty to inform him of those orders. The oracle went on to say that he was to appoint Dandolo to scout for a husband.
Sometime later, Dandolo did find a suitable husband for Christine, a young Venetian named Charles. The marriage which Bragadin and Casanova attended took place the following week. The old priest carried out the marriage vows. And so it was. Casanova was born into humble beginnings in Venice. Educated at Padua University, he found an interest in the books on the macabre and erotic. His early encounters with high society with the benefit and good fortune of embracing a life in the church by becoming a priest. Although fate had something else in store for Casanova, losing his virginity to two sisters, his future in the church was extinguished. But through his benefactor, Senator Bragadin, he was reborn into high society, and a new life of gambling and seduction began.
Think only of enjoying yourself. Take me as your advisor in everything that may happen to you, and you may be certain of always finding me your friend.
I'm not sure if Casanova was himself somebody everyone would like.
Could you accept a man like me?
Oh, well then I must believe that you are not a perfect man.
My spirit is strong enough to resist even so fatal a blow, for I know I have a friend in you.
At least tell me, madam, whether the captain is your husband or your father. I flatter myself I can convince her to sacrifice that lover for me.
It is my most ardent wish, and to realise it, I am ready to do anything.
Absolutely divine. I knew you'd give in.